Tesla built this tower called Wardenclyffe Tower, and his hope was to be able to transmit free energy around the world.
They knew what they were doing. They might have been making an infinite energy source essentially with these things. And I know that sounds kind of crazy for some. We're not just talking about how did these people stack blocks in the middle of the desert. We're talking about why does it look like they made a Tesla coil in the middle of the desert?
So they could conduct electricity on the inside, insulate it on the outside, and they used very specific types of limestone based on where it was on the pyramid. In the very core where the king's and queen's chambers are, things like that, it's built out of 85% quartz, and quartz is often used in technology that generates electricity.
There are people that are saying these are going to be used again. And the tilt of the earth has changed, so maybe it's not lined up like it was in the solar system previously.
When the Egyptians found it, they made their mark on it. There's a lot more evidence to suggest that this whole structure is significantly older.
They said the entire study was completely wrong and lacked any scientific basis. Independent scientists responded to that saying, no, these techniques are legitimate and this is real science and we've been using it for years.
So what does the American dollar, the Twin Towers, and George Washington all have in common? Nobody knows. Okay. The structures beneath the Khafre Pyramid, that's the smaller pyramid of the two main ones in Giza, were discovered using radar technology that allowed the researchers to obtain images without disturbing the site. Beneath the pyramid is a total of 8 cylindrical structures, 648 meters in length, approximately. These cylinders connect to 2 large cubical structures at the bottom, totaling approximately 2 kilometers beneath the surface, which is about 1.25 miles. Researchers believe this new finding proves that the pyramids are a mechanical system. Regardless of what the pyramids are after this discovery, it's now generally agreed that the pyramids were not tombs. This is general. When I say that, I mean generally amongst like the populace. The government in Egypt and everybody over there is still saying, no, these are just tombs and that's all. And this is all speculation. So just to be clear, the interesting point about this that I actually didn't even know was that this paper that proves or shows these images was actually published in 2022. So it's curious as to why we are just now starting to really pay attention to it.
That's weird.
So my question for you guys is, first, I actually want to hear some theories from you guys about what you think is going on, what these are, is it real? Do you believe it? And if you do, what do you think it all means?
It is time for Doug's Conspiracy Corner.
So
who wants to go first?
We need to get that soundtrack professionally made.
That's
obviously.
awesome. So
that wasn't professional.
So I think it's very curious, the timing of this being released. And I don't think that's an accident. I think that there's priming taking place. There's maybe whatever this mechanically could do, perhaps they're preparing for that to fire up again. And I think there's a lot about, there's this whole part of physics called string theory, and you need 10 or 11 dimensions in order to make string theory work. And I think that we're sort of getting into, what you're doing with the Hadron Collider and CERN, and they're trying to open up access to other dimensions and actually communicating with other dimensions. And so this is not, that's like mainstream, maybe not mainstream, but that's like out in the open and pretty on the nose transparent with what's been going on. And I think there's pretty good evidence for us to see that there's something going on with this there that's trying to access other dimensions or used to maybe access other dimensions. Because you talk about how these were built aligned on the latitude, the same, almost the speed of light, the longitudinal or latitudinal location. You see how it's aligned with certain stars, and how you see these pyramids in other parts of the world and the same designs and the same. And so I think it's pretty evident that there's some sort of knowledge coming from perhaps another realm or dimension that is partnering with these kinds of things, these people or whatever, being able to build these things. And I know people are talking about aliens and that sort of thing, but that's not, I don't believe that's a thing, but that's kind of me throwing this out there as to what I think is going on. And I do, there are people that are saying these are going to be used again. And the tilt of the earth has changed. So maybe it's not lined up like it was in the solar system previously, but the tilt of the earth is changing. And so that's perhaps coming back into play. And then you have the magnetic field of the earth, and you have sound, sound frequencies, and being able to move large stones. And so there's a lot that goes into this, but I think it's pretty clear that, the idea of this being only human origins, I think is pretty hard pill to swallow. I think it's hard to believe that.
It's a hard pill to swallow, and we've all, I think, historically just shrugged our shoulders at the idea of like, well, how did the Egyptians build the pyramids? And then, people have historically said, we're not quite sure. They were very smart, and so I think there's 4 categories where my brain goes, when you think about where did the pyramids come from, trying to answer that question. Obviously could have been the Egyptians, and that's historically what people have said. Could have been an ancient civilization before the Egyptians. They could have found the pyramids, and then not really known what they were there for, and kind of just took over and used them for religious purposes or whatever. Could have been aliens. That's another big theory out there. The aliens either built them or showed people how to build them, something like that. Obviously, as a Christian, reading the Bible, I would hold to the theory of it's probably more closely related to, the Nephilim, something like that. And giants, in the Old Testament, something along those lines. So there's a lot of different theories out there, but the interesting thing that I found in the research this week was how people have historically said the pyramids are about 4,500 years old, and yet the researchers that did this study, I think the number they threw out there was like 38,000 years or something like that, which was a lot older than most people have been willing to admit, and I personally don't even know if I believe the earth is that old, but, so I think, personally, I don't think I would follow them to that date, but that's interesting is like, I think that they're looking at it from the perspective of either an ancient civilization, or something before the Egyptians.
Yeah, that's an interesting date because that does for most mainstream, archaeologist type people, that's getting a little bit beyond like the oldest human civilizations, essentially, like 20,000 years ago to 40,000 years ago. It's like, at what point exactly was there human civilizations or humans on the earth? And oftentimes people will, I don't remember the exact dates, but when you said that, it's like, I know it's somewhere within that range.
Right. And that's why people laugh, because they said, haha, people were just living in caves at that point or whatever, that was the response. So I don't know how they even come to those conclusions with those dates. So they just like slap a date on things.
I think if somebody talks about things and they say, they're a scientist and they come from a scientific perspective, and it kind of just all of a sudden gives them permission to have huge gaps in information that actually give no explanation for what they're saying. And just because they're coming from a science perspective, or even if it's not a scientific question, like science isn't the only way to know about truth and that sort of thing. So I think it's important that we recognize, I don't know, maybe they used ramps and hammers and a lot of people, like, okay, right. What do you mean maybe? Hold on. What do you mean maybe? Like, okay, so we don't understand that. So kind of everything we're talking about here is kind of off in the realm of this kind of mysterious, kind of mystical type thing. And so what we need to do is look at all the different explanations and say, what's the best fit? Like, what actually fits best to this?
If I could jump in on 2 points really fast. The first, I'm going to talk about the pyramids themselves, because I've heard that before where people be like, I've heard a lot of people make jokes about like, oh, why would humans need aliens or interdimensional beings, or I'll jump onto the Nephilim in a second, like something other than humans to help them build, giant triangles in the desert. I've heard people kind of joke about that thing. But what's interesting, of course, is when you actually get into it's not just the size of these things. It's not just which is impressive enough by themselves, and the cutting of the stone and the way that they stack them up like that in the desert, but it's actually some of the dimensions and some of the elements, like you guys mentioned, the fact that they're perfectly aligned between like the North and the South Pole, like right in line, with the 30 latitude or whatever it is, and then there's some of the dimensions you can do funky things with, like if you take everyone's favorite number, 432 for 432 hertz, which is people's like considered to be like the super special, music, like the classical music was written in that frequency or whatever, and that's a lot of people's preferred. If you take that number and you do some funky things with the pyramids, it's crazy what you can do. It's like you multiply things and you suddenly get like the circumference of the earth, or you get all these other certain things. You mentioned like the alignment they have with the stars. So I've seen stuff like that. One that you threw out like a portal to other dimensions. One not quite as crazy that I've seen theory is that these pyramids are really similar to the Tesla coils that Nikola Tesla developed. And that's one of the things that I think is the most astounding is it's like when you look at the insides of them, and there's like they have these kind of prongs going on, and there was even evidence that there was like they had like chemicals for like explosions, and or even possibly like you guys, one of y'all mentioned like the vibrations occurring where like it kind of resonates with the earth. It all sort of looks like and sort of connected to the idea of Nikola Tesla having. He's making these coils that can generate infinite electricity because it's treating the earth as the generator. And so the earth is generating electricity, and we're just taking advantage of that, and we're just tapping into that. And so there's some elements to the pyramids that you look at it, it's actually pretty similar to that. You can imagine and be like, wow, if they knew what they were doing, they might have been making an infinite energy source essentially with these things. And I know that sounds kind of crazy for some, but I think it puts it out there a little bit more than just, we're not just talking about how did these people stack blocks in the middle of the desert. We're talking about why does it look like they made a Tesla coil in the middle of the desert?
That's where my brain went this week. I was like, well, what the heck is the purpose behind, so I did a little research in that direction, and they've almost got me convinced. I'll just say this, I typically don't go for like, I don't go down rabbit holes and stay very long, but I'm like, I'm having a hard time getting out of this one. Some of the things I found, I'm just going to throw some like random stuff that stuck. Okay. One of the things was Tesla built this tower called Wardenclyffe Tower. And essentially it was a power generator that was able to transmit electricity wirelessly. And his hope was to be able to transmit free energy around the world, right? For everybody. And, obviously almost everyone probably knows the story of his investors backing out and not wanting to support that, eventually shutting him down and investing in his competitors, Edison and the like, and him dying broke, and his tower eventually got torn apart and sold for scrap. That's why we don't have it today. We can't study it necessarily, but I've seen drawings of this tower. And the funny thing was these drawings have been done years ago, and the drawings show pillar-like structures coming down below the tower to an aquifer under the ground. And it looks very similar to the same concept. These shafts going down, wells essentially going down below the pyramids to what, and there potentially being an aquifer down below and other rooms or whatever. Originally, the pyramids had an extra shell on the outside. Okay. Mm-hmm. And the shell was made out of a specific kind of limestone that had to be imported in from about 100 miles away. And this kind of limestone did not have magnesium inside of it. And so it was a very good insulator of electricity. So on the outside, they had limestone that would insulate electricity and keep it from escaping. On the inside of the pyramids, they used limestone that did have magnesium and acts as a very good conductor of electricity. So they could conduct electricity on the inside, insulate it on the outside. And they used very specific types of limestone based on where it was on the pyramid. And then in the very core where the king's and queen's chambers are, things like that, it's built out of 85% quartz. And quartz is often used in technology that generates electricity, such as a quartz watch. So if you've ever had one of those watches where you can shake it and then it's like, okay, it's working again. It's because it has quartz in there. And quartz, when pressure is applied to quartz, it literally generates an electric current. And that's how those watches work. So the shaking generates an electric current. The aquifer creates pressure, and the pressure essentially, when the water rises, and I'm not sure exactly how it works, but it essentially puts pressure on this massive amount of quartz, generating electricity. They capture the electricity, and somehow they're able to send it out. So that's the idea behind it. But it's one of those rabbit holes where I'm like, okay, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get out of this one, but because it's,
I think that's a great explanation. I think that I'm glad you shared that, because I'm thinking, okay, but they didn't. like what would the use for electricity have been then? Because they didn't have cell phones to charge and that sort of thing. So you got to think there's got to be another use for that type of energy creation.
You never know though, Ryan. It could have just been, cell phone coverage or something like that. We need to go back and watch the commercials of the time and see if they got the pyramids in the background and they're like, hey, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Like we've got the best coverage
awesome.
in ancient Egypt.
I want to hear Doug's theories. Doug, what you've got the theories. What do you think's going on?
I've got theories that take a completely different direction, but they also involve that. So first of all, Tesla was actually inspired by the pyramids, and he personally believed that they were energy systems. You know what? Actually, let's do this. I'm going to show you guys some pictures because we talked about, Troy, you especially were talking about the shape of it. And I think it's really fascinating to look at this. So I got some pictures. I'm going to pull them up real quick.
Something while you're looking that up that I'll throw out there for people to research is the idea of quantum entanglement and how you can have particles and things that are physically separated, but when you do something to one of them and the other one's on the other side of the country, it also responds to whatever's done to the other part of that. And that's quantum entanglement. So there's obviously something else going on connecting those two. And that's where we start to talk about these dimensions. Like there's obviously more to reality than we can just see.
So these are the cubicles at the bottom of it that, Troy, you were referencing. This is like basically the generator, right? These are the base of the cylinders, and the cylinders obviously go up much higher than this. And then we're going to look at what this looks like on a more larger scale. So this is an interpretation of what it would look like kind of a little bit more realistically. So you got the cubicles at the bottom here, and then the cylinders going up to the top connecting to the pyramid, right? These are the thing that's like over a mile long. And these coils around, they're not entirely sure what the coils are, but it appears as though they're hollow and they could be some kind of passageway, but I would posit that they are more than just a passageway. If they are a passageway where you could literally start at the bottom and walk all the way up, then they're probably also some kind of energy conductor as well.
I mean, you got to just be thinking, wow, things are not what I thought. I mean, you literally, every time you learn about pyramids or hear about pyramids, you think, wow, that's, I don't know how they did that, but somehow they did it. And then you start to think, wait a minute, it's not quite as simple and straightforward. And so now people really should be looking for answers or wanting answers.
It's kind of a crazy idea to believe that maybe these are energy, these produce energy, but when you see it like this, it makes it a little bit more believable.
Yeah,
I think it's like, okay, I can see where that would work.
I think it's just the connection of like how it just gets so sticky eventually. I mean, I understand why you jump in and be like, oh, maybe they're producing energy, or is this to access other. I mean, I'm partial to potentially, this is helpful somehow for dimensions, just because being a Christian, I have more of a spiritual mindset, and I think that the Bible is true, and I think that the Book of Enoch is true. And even if you don't think those things are true, completely true, you have to look at the mythology evidence. Like I said, every single culture having the same exact mythology of when the gods came down, and there's like evidence and archaeology that's like there's kind of a connection back then. I understand why. I don't know if I'm 100% sold on it. I understand why people come up with these theories, because there's certain when you look at the pyramids and ancient technology like this, there's certainly something going on. I just don't know exactly what it was. But anyways, you can continue.
So the Egyptians like to claim that they are, the originators of the pyramids, which naturally, I mean, anybody would want to. If you found that in your country, you'd want to have the pride of being able to claim something so magnificent as that, right? But this is starting to look like it is actually much older than Egypt. And this is still speculation. It has not been officially confirmed, but we're also right at the breaking point of some of this information really being scrutinized, right? So the interesting thing about the Egyptians trying to claim that is that even a lot of what the Egyptians claim as their own particular culture there's evidence that is not even from them. It is from something much older. And you could trace it back to the Greco-Roman era. But in fact, you can actually, and this is dipping into some, like the further back you go in history, the more muddy it gets, right? Because obviously we're not very close to it. So our long-term vision it gets blurrier, right? So you can take this back even further than the Greco-Roman era and into this is going to dip into some esoteric stuff, but it's Hermeticism. And a lot of the imagery that you find in Egypt archaeology can actually be rooted. You can find it in some of these old Hermetic cultures. So I opened up with a question, right? That was a fun question. What does the American dollar, the Twin Towers, and George Washington all have in common? We all know that there's a pyramid on the back of the American dollar, and that the all-seeing eye at the top of it, that isn't like connected yet, but that's a reference to the Eye of Osiris, right? But the Eye of Osiris goes back even further. That we always think of that as being Egyptian, but it actually goes back further into some of the Hermetic principles. No, the
fact that this potentially could be before Egypt is common throughout the world when we see big structures, because we see similar types of structures in ziggurats. And I've seen documentaries on these kinds of things, and even giants' bones that used to be on display in museums in America that the Smithsonian came and took and got rid of. And then you see, like I've seen where they were going and they discovered these kinds of structures in like Central America or North America, and they asked the Indians there or the natives there that were there. They said, "Tell us how you built these. This is incredible." And the natives said, "These were here when we got here. Like we didn't build these.
Right.
Like these big structures and things were just here." And so it's kind of that's common to where it's like it predates what anybody was here to create in their civilization.
This pyramid is much older than the Egyptians, and the reason why people think that it's Egyptian is because when the Egyptians found it, they made their mark on it. But that's all. There's a lot more evidence to suggest that this whole structure is significantly older than. Well, here, let's get into some fun stuff. All right, you ready? I'm gonna give you another picture. Tell me what you guys see in that.
Oh, I see kind of pyramid-shaped arches or above the doors on the left and the right.
Is that the snake?
This is a Masonic lodge?
The snake head, the serpent head or something?
This is the Grand Masonic Lodge of New York, okay? You see these pillars right here? Can't help but notice that these pillars are holding up this triangular / pyramid structure, right? And this is where the Grand Master sits with his buddies on each side of him. So
That's not creepy at all.
I know, right? Yeah. And this is a common thing too. It's not like, oh, this is just one-off thing in the New York Lodge. No, this is just the most fancy looking, because I mean it's one of the biggest lodges.
I think I'm going to model my den after that.
It's actually quite beautiful. But
do you have the Serpent Temple Vatican picture?
No, I didn't pull that.
You got to be kidding me! It's the same.
I was trying to keep it a little bit more like on a particular trajectory as far as the story goes.
Can edit that out.
I would love to get into some of that stuff, but I was like, all right, I've already got enough.
Yeah, we'll stick with the pyramids and stay away from the serpents for now.
Yeah. Has anybody put together the George Washington clue yet?
Oh, so you're saying that's the pyramid on top, and underneath is what's underneath the pyramid? Is that what you're saying?
This obelisk. Hold on.
You're saying that the whole thing
I get
is
it
the
now.
obelisk shape.
Before I would have thought, oh, that's not pyramid shaped.
Oh man,
I didn't know what
I just
was
saw it.
underneath.
Now you can't unsee.
Yeah, I just
it.
saw it too. So now it's like they're all pyramid shaped because of the columns underneath the pyramid. So it's like that's going on, and then the Masonic Lodge, it has a column that's holding up the pyramid shape. I get it now.
Check this out. This one, like I was, midnight last night looking this up, and I was like, what's in Washington Monument?
Tell me it's a bunch of cylinders.
Pillars.
Are you kidding me?
There's 8 pillars in here holding up that obelisk.
How many pillars are under the pyramid? Did they say 8?
Yep. There's.
Oh man.
Hold on.
Yeah,
Where are
so,
these pillars
yeah.
at? These are at the top, or these are at the bottom holding?
Those are at the bottom.
So there's 2 cubes, right? And each cube has 4 pillars emitting from it. And then this is sitting inside. So a lot of this is just simply symbolic.
Crazy.
It's kind of eerie. I need to think about this. I'm gonna have to.
Yeah,
now I'm gonna have to do some more research into who built this, who designed it, when was it done, all this stuff. Like that's.
No, you
I was gonna say from a biblical perspective, this is all. It's just a perversion of the reality. It's a twisting. It's a copying of the reality, and that's like what we see the pattern showing up in these things. That's the pattern. It's a perversion. It's accessing something. It's twisting something. It's saying God's holding out on us. We need to do this ourselves. We need to do Tower of Babel, like literally everything. I mean, that's why the
Yeah.
flood
But
came.
they've got a big G right there, Ryan. It stands
Big
for
G.
God. Come on.
Yeah, that's right. Just enough to deceive people, right? Just enough to give you stop asking questions.
It actually stands
Okay.
for George
You
Washington.
guys ready for this next one?
We're ready.
And
I
it
don't know.
comes full circle. I love it.
You should recognize this one.
Uh-oh.
Oh yeah.
Oh, man.
Well,
Pillars, pyramid.
I don't know if this is a burst of the bubble or just further connection, because now it just makes me think of a lot of that architecture comes from, or people at least will say comes from Greece.
But I would say
the
too,
Parthenon
like,
looks like
let's-
that. You could pull up a Parthenon and stick it right next to it. It looks exactly the same. However,
And
now
that's
I'm
the
thinking
excuse.
like, oh wow, well, that's so interesting because the Parthenon, that's what the Parthenon is columns with a pyramid on the top of it. So that's interesting. Interesting common image occurring.
Maybe the Greeks and the Romans did it, but they got it from somewhere too. But it's basically an old Hermetic picture. It's got the pillars in it. It's got the pyramid shapes in there. It's not exactly the same format, but it all stems from this deep occultic knowledge, right? We look at the things that we have in this country and we say either one, we were obsessed with the Romans, or two, we were obsessed with the Egyptians. But the reality is there's a connection there. And it seems as though they got this information from something much, much deeper than either one of those. The reason for that being is Freemasonry is rooted in the older ancient occult knowledge that is Hermeticism as far as we can push back and discover. Basically, it might even go older than that. And Freemasonry has changed faces over the centuries, because Freemasonry has only been around since I think like 1700s, like 1717, something like that. But before that, it was the Knights Templar. Before that, it goes back a long ways, and it's basically the same thing with a different face.
It's always good. It's always good because I learned that watching National Treasure. They're the heroes.
Right. Yeah.
They're always the good guys, for sure.
This one is my favorite part of this whole thing. Can anybody tell me what this image is?
Is that one of the Twin Towers?
Yep, sure is. Those steel bars on the Twin Towers have a really interesting resemblance to tuning forks. The Twin Towers are connected to the pyramids in this way. So the Giza pyramids are dimensionally proportional to the World Trade Center complex. Okay? The Great Pyramid Khufu without the capstone is 139 meters. The height of the North Tower is 417 meters, which is exactly 3 times 139. The Khafre Pyramid is 136 meters tall. The South Tower is 415 meters, which is exactly 136 times 3. For some strange reason, these towers that were in a strange way designed in similar concept as the pyramids, they were taken down. These steel beams right here literally can collect energy because of their shape. And then we have these pyramids that do the same thing, that emit energy via their coils. There's something else going on here. And I'm sure that this gets really, really deep, and you could probably go down rabbit holes for days.
For the sake of the audience, I think we haven't even talked about the whole tuning fork idea.
Mm-hmm.
So the same idea of the pyramids being able to generate electricity and conduct electricity. One of the ways they did that was through a certain frequency, which I think was maybe F sharp. Is that right? Or something like that? But essentially it's tuned to a very specific vibration, which is the frequency of the earth. It's where the earth sits as far as how it vibrates. Mm-hmm. That was what was causing the actual electricity to be generated through the granite or whatever, or the quartz. So one interesting fact is, if you want to hear what that sounds like, you can turn on your Mac, and that MacBook like duh sound, that is that exact tune.
Oh wow!
Yeah, so that's the sound. Yeah, but that was, they have these slanted roof looking shapes inside of the pyramids, and one of the theories is that those roofs, everything else about them is the rock that was used is very smooth, and it's like it was all cut specifically, but the roof is very rough, And they think the reason for that was that people manually by hand went in after the fact. They created the thing, and then by hand they went after the fact and kept shaving it down until they got it to create the exact frequency they needed once it was vibrated, and once they applied the pressure. So then they were trying to match the Earth's frequency, and that's how they were essentially generating enough pressure to create the electricity. So it all has to do with the frequency, the vibration of the Earth, and the frequency created there, and matching that. And so the whole that's where the tuning fork thing comes into play. So I don't think we really talked about that necessarily during the episode.
No,
So
I'm glad you explained that, because that was one of the ones I thought of as well. I've heard that tuning fork analogy. It's really interesting you bring that up, Doug. Just seeing the picture of like the two main pyramids close to each other, and then like the twin towers, and knowing that they're like proportionally similar in their structure in that way is interesting. It conjures up some interesting images, that's for sure, and some rabbit
They're
holes,
situated in the same way too, diagonal to each other. If you were to go onto Google Maps and look at an overhead view of the pyramids, and then go and look at an overhead view of obviously now the memorial, but the blocks, the squares are still there. They're inverted, so it's like the memorial's like this, but the pyramids are like that. But it's still, you can tell it's the same exact situation.
Yeah, twinning. They're just like twins to the pyramids. Interesting.
Some of the Egyptian government specifically, and scientists who are already studying the pyramids, did respond to the radar survey findings, saying, and this is a quote that I found from an article this week. They said the entire study was completely wrong and lacked any scientific basis. And very strange that was there, lacked any scientific basis. And then independent scientists responded to that saying, no, these techniques are legitimate, and this is real science, and we've been using it for years to study underground tunnels and aquifers and wells and things like that. They say it's very accurate, and we've been doing this for a long time. Y'all don't know what you're talking about. So, it's just funny how science is, where it's like sometimes it's science and other times it's somebody with an inflated ego and a high opinion of themselves saying something that they didn't research, and maybe that's some of what I did in today's episode with my limited knowledge.
Well, just to see the Egyptian government shut it down so quickly, instead of saying this is interesting, for them to come out and say, oh, absolutely not, this is totally bogus, when it's like, wait.
Yeah, that's the whole point of science is to have a theory and then to disprove it. Like that's what it's supposed to be. So more information, more transparency, more investigation is the direction, not, oh, stop. It's not what you said it was, and you stop and don't do anything else. And we're not going to do anything. Just believe me. Like, okay, yeah, that's. Well, I'm more curious. If you weren't curious before, I'm curious now.
Yeah, and it's also, I think it's really healthy for it to be challenged. Shut down, obviously not, but to be challenged and be like, no, that's not how we do things. Because then what that does is it generates more of a conversation about it. And then it's like, okay, well, if you really believe that your findings are true and accurate, then you're going to dig in deeper and you're going to prove it even more on top of that. Or you're going to disprove it because you're like, oh crap, actually, you know what? Yeah, you're right. This was not.
You're either going to bring the facts to the table or you're not going to be able to,
which just confirms one way or the other even more, so we can be more assured that the answer that we're getting is closer to the truth, or as close to the truth as possible.